Good evening, everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming. I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule tonight to come to us for our very first town hall meeting on tonight's topic is the danger of a single story. We hope this is the beginning of many fruitful events within Scottsdale as we, the Human Relations Commission, talk about different issues and things like that as we go forward in this wonderful time that we're living in right now. Just a couple of housekeeping things that you see right here. As Megan was saying earlier, as you guys logged in, please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. Please use the Q&A feature. And one of our other moderators who are behind the scenes will help me get as many questions as possible. I know some of you might have a whole lot of questions. This is obviously not an easy topic. And again, I appreciate you guys being here to have a discussion about these issues. This video will be released at some point on social media and on the Scottsdale HRC webpage. So please look forward to that, and you can send it to all your friends and all your colleagues. And we will have time at the end of this to have at the beginning of this to have audience introductions. We'd like to get to know a little bit about you as much as we're going to tell you about ourselves and the people that are on the panel. The three wonderful people that are here tonight on the panel are Nadia Mustafa, Bob Frost, Kyra King, and Indica cannot be with us tonight, but she sends her regards and she appreciates the care that everybody in the city has regarding this issue. So without further ado, I don't have I can't see you guys, but why don't we just go around, and as you unmute yourself, what I'd like you guys to do to say is your name. There we go. Your name, how long have you lived in the city, and one interesting thing about yourselves or one fact about yourself. Let's start with Brian. He's the first person on mine.
Hi, Stuart. Brian is actually one of our lead staff IT people.
I see it now. I see it. Yeah. All right, let's go to Jim. How are you doing, Jim?
Hi, Stuart. How are you?
I'm awesome.
Great. I'm Jim Eaneman, a member of the Human Relations Commission, a 5-year resident of Scottsdale, a retired human resources manager for a major company and then consulted all over the country. And I collect historical books and great old rock and roll.
Awesome. Conay, how are you doing tonight?
I'm well, sorry about that. I was eating. Conay Weezar, I've been in Scottsdale for 20 years. And interesting, what else was it? I'm sorry, I was very distracted. What else was that? Pardon?
I'm sorry, you're on, I'm sorry, Jim and Conay are both on the Human Relations Commission. Also let us know if you're on a board or a commission and which one. Sorry about that.
Human Relations Commission. And interesting fact, I will be leaving on a 30-day trip to Istanbul, Turkey in about 2 weeks.
Awesome. Safe travels. Janine, did I say that right?
It's Jeannie, I believe.
Jeannie, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name's Jeanne Alspaugh. I served on the Parks and Recreation Commission for 6 years. I chaired for 2 of those with Bob Frost. And I currently am serving on the Tourism Development Commission. I just began my service, and I've lived in Scottsdale for over 20 years. And a fun fact about me, I am a longtime volunteer at a therapeutic horsemanship barn out in North Scottsdale.
Awesome. I'm sure you and Bob have had many interesting conversations about that.
Yes, we have.
All right, thank you. Hanley, how are you tonight?
I am good, Stuart. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hanley Mendoza. I am serving my 2nd term with the Human Relations Commission. I've been in Scottsdale for over 13 years. An interesting thing about me is after 15 years, I've decided to take up tennis again. I'm enjoying it, especially with the coming cooler weather. Thank you.
Awesome. Janice, how are you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Janice Shimikubo, and I've lived in Scottsdale for 4.5 years, and I currently serve on the Human Relations Commission. An interesting fact, I love to play bridge, I love yoga, and I love hiking. Thank you.
Awesome. Peter, how are you tonight?
Doing good once I get it off mute.
No worries.
I'm the chair for the Veterans Commission, and I've lived in Scottsdale for over 10 years here, working at General Dynamics. I'm retired now. And let's see, I also was involved in the Army of developing what we know as the human dimension concept, which gets into a lot of the pieces here because the Army has to operate across many nations and cultures and everything else, which becomes important. So find this very fascinating. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Congresswoman Milhaven, how are you tonight?
I'm good, thank you. So I'm Linda Milhaven, excuse me. I'm currently on the City Council. And a fun fact about me is today I am working virtually from the tall pines in northern Arizona.
Awesome.
30 years in Scottsdale.
So you're actually cooler than we are, right? So, you know, we're talking about, oh my God, it's cold out here. And you're like, actually cool.
Will you be mad at me if I tell you I had to turn the heat on this morning?
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Marna, how are you tonight?
Hi, Stuart, and hi, everybody. I've been in Scottsdale since 2003, coming from Howard County, Maryland, former law enforcement and prosecutor, but I also represented the Human Rights Commission in Howard County, Maryland for 6 years. Good to be with you tonight.
Awesome. Thank you. Jan, how are you tonight?
I think you mean me, Janet Smigielski?
Yes.
Correct? Oh, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Janet. I'm on the library board, and until COVID hit, I was also volunteering at the library 2 days a week. As a former reference librarian, I actually was able to be on the floor with the librarians and help the patrons, which I truly loved and look forward to returning to someday. Interesting fact, let's see. Well, I do volunteer work for Rescue a Golden, and right now we're doing all our home visits virtually. And it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of international dogs right now. And I've lived in Scottsdale for 10 years. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Stephanie. Let's go to Brad, and then I'll come back to Stephanie. Brad, how are you tonight?
I'm doing excellent, thank you. My name is Brad Hartig. I'm the CIO for the City of Scottsdale, representing the leadership team here a little bit. I really have great passion associated with the subject as far as diversity and inclusion and just everything that's going on in society these days. This hit kind of a note where I would be happy to spend some time in the evening to participate in this type of discussion. As far as interesting facts about me, there was somebody else on who was talking about tennis. I would strongly recommend pickleball for people who are coming a little bit older in age. It's easier to play, and it's an awesome sport and very, very social. People are extremely engaging. And then I am a avid Black Diamond bump, the extreme sport skier.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Tom, how are you tonight?
Hi there. I'm Tom Durham. I'm lived here in Scottsdale about 6 years, and I'm one of the candidates for City Council. Interesting things about me, I've ridden my bicycle across Iowa 11 times in the Register's annual Great Bicycle Ride Across Iowa. And I was reminded by Facebook today that it was exactly 5 years ago that I finished the Santiago de Compostela route, the pilgrimage route to Camino de Santiago across Spain. And I finished it 5 years ago at the cathedral in Santiago, Spain.
Awesome. It's a lot easier to ride across Iowa than it is Colorado, right? A lot flatter. Janice, how are you tonight?
Oh, hi there. Hi, Stuart. I haven't seen you in a long time. Sorry, I had to get on this late because I had to finish up on my Human Services Commission meeting just now. So what?
No problems.
What do I need to do?
Your name, we just heard what commission you're on. How long have you lived in Scottsdale? And one interesting thing.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I've lived in Scottsdale now, I believe, for 10 years. And time sure does fly. I can't believe it's already been 10 years. It seems like just yesterday. An interesting thing about me. I'm trying to think. Well, I have a tendency to spread myself a little thin. Even though I just retired, I seem busier now than I've ever been. And I don't know how to say no. It's like all these other things and doing my civic duty just creates more passion in me to get things done. This particular issue about this town hall meeting, it really comes front and center, being a minority and having experienced some backlash since this COVID thing came out, especially being Asian. And you wouldn't think that you would run into that here in Scottsdale, but I have, which is really quite sad. I sort of got off track, sorry guys, but that's something interesting about me. I'm like Ricochet Rabbit, for those of you that are old enough to remember that, I'm all over the place. So that's what's interesting about me.
Bing, 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 I remember.
Yeah, see?
Don't let the face fool you, don't let the young look fool you.
Yep,
Emily,
yep.
how are you?
Did you say Emily?
Yes.
Okay. I'm also on the Human Service Commission. I've been in Scottsdale for 9 years, and I am an occupational therapist, and I own my own practice. So I work with individuals in their homes to help make functional home environments so that they can live there and age in place.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for sharing your stories and just a little something about you. What I'd like to do now is to take a couple of minutes to introduce the panelists. So I'm just going to go across my screen. Bob, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
And
okay, I'm up. My name is Bob Frost, and I'm a retired city employee. I started in 1971 and retired in 97 as general manager. After that, I served 3 years on the Public Art Collections Committee, 6 years on the Parks and Recreation Commission, 6 years on the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve Commission. And 2017, I was fortunate enough to be inducted into the Scottsdale History Makers Hall of Fame. Presently, I'm Scottsdale's honorary poet laureate and have been for 8 years. I'm a life member of the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Scottsdale and currently chaplain of the United States Marine Corps League Detachment 1439.
awesome. You seem to have the same affliction as Janice does, right? not like staying busy, right? Constantly.
Keeping busy, that's for sure.
Exactly. It's better than the alternative, right?
Right.
Nadia, how are you tonight?
Good, thanks, Stuart. Hi, everyone. I'm Nadia Mustafa. I've lived in Scottsdale with my husband for 13 years. I served a 3-year term on the Human Relations Commission. I'm a social justice advocate, including serving on the board of the American Civil Liberties Union of Arizona. I teach yoga, I'm a sommelier, and I have a wine education business. And I'm mom to a 5-year-old and 8-year-old. And I'm a journalist, formerly a reporter for Time magazine and now freelance. So I'm a strong believer in the power of storytelling, for better or for worse, hopefully for better.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And last but not least, Kyra, how are you?
Hi, I'm Kyra. I've been in Arizona for 1 year. I spent 10 years in New York. Before that, I grew up in New Mexico. I have 2 boys, aged 2 and 7. I'm a health and wellness coach, a leadership coach. I'm the new Miss Arizona for America for this year. And now I'm the Vice President of Outreach for Scottsdale Parent Council, as well as the chairperson for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for Scottsdale Parent Council, and continuing to work with different nonprofits in that area.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And I'll take a point of privilege. I'm Stuart Rhoden, Dr. Stuart Rhoden. I've been living in Scottsdale for the past 7 years. I currently work in the University College at Arizona State University, Sun Devils. And I teach academic success, critical thinking, and sociology.
Stuart, hi, it's Kelly. I think the one person we didn't hear from is Brent Stockwell. We also have, I'll just mention Jan Horn and Stephanie Hirata, who you'll see in the participants list, are members of my team, and they're just kind of eavesdropping. So Brent would like to say hi.
Absolutely. Thanks. Sorry about that, Brent. How are you?
No worries. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Stockwell. I'm one of the assistant city managers here at the City of Scottsdale. I've worked for the city for almost 19 years, starting at the start of 2021, being 19 years with the city. Kind of the fun fact about me and related to the commonality between many of you is that the City of Scottsdale has 23 citizen advisory boards and commissions. And of those 23, 15 of them are in my portfolio area, so 65% of them. So I don't always get a chance to get out and be at all the commission meetings and see all the commission members, but I did want to very much thank each one of you for your service. I also lead the office that Kelly and his team are part of, Communications and Citizen Service. And we really, citizen service is where our volunteer program is. And so board and commission members are a huge part of that. And so one of the things that we wanted to do, and this was a great opportunity to do so, is to provide opportunities for board and commission members to be meaningfully involved and provide input outside of the kind of core areas where they're serving. And so as the Human Relations Commission was thinking about how to do this pilot town hall, we thought it was a great idea to reach out to all the board and commission members and ask you to participate in this so that you can be part of this dialogue and help Scottsdale be an even better and more welcoming place for all. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brent. I appreciate it. Sorry for neglecting you earlier.
No worries.
What we want to do now, and thank you guys all for participating. I'm really excited about what we're about to embark upon. I want you, let me just, as a teacher and educator, everybody did their homework, right? Yes, yes. Don't show your hands. I'm just kidding. I hope everybody had a chance to to watch the video. And we're going to elicit some responses of the video, but I want to begin with this idea. And if you could put the slide up, that would be wonderful. While they're doing that, let me just read it to you. So what do you think is Scottsdale's single story? As we're thinking about this, and I want to sort of give this to you as an idea of things that, as we're talking about with the panelists, I want to sort of give you the end at the beginning so that we can sort of begin with this dialogue after we hear from the panelists. So what is the Scottsdale single story, and what often does not get included in the Scottsdale story? So as you're hearing the panelists tell their stories, and I'm going to start to ask them a couple of questions, I want you to begin, if you have an idea, put it in the Q&A, and then we'll be able to get to the discussion after we hear from each of our 3 wonderful panelists. Let me begin with Nadia. So when we're talking about the TED Talk that we saw, and there's so many TED Talks out there that we could have chosen, and we chose this with purposeful intent about this particular audience and the topic at tonight's discussion. So as a journalist, mom, activist. The author mentions when we create a single story, we show people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. So we get a host of a single picture or a snapshot, if you will, right? So if I took a screenshot of everybody right here, we get a snapshot of that image. As someone who has worked in journalism and developing stories, how do you think stories have the potential to rob people of their dignity?
Good question, Stuart. Always with the good questions. You know, the one thing that stuck out to me, one of the many things that stuck out to me in the video was that Adichie talks about the concept of unkali. She says that power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. This is the story of America, not just currently, but always. Since 1619, when a single story was told about the enslaved Africans who arrived on a ship to the English colony of Virginia. That single story is what allowed for 250 years of slavery. And the single story crafted about African Americans after slavery has allowed for continued oppression. Stories aren't just about color. Race is indeed the defining single story of this country. Adichie talks about Nigerians experiencing normalized political fear. In America and in Arizona, many people of color experience normalized racial fear. But there are so many other stories told about social status, economic status, sexual identity, religion, political affiliation, gender, ability, and the list goes on and on. Any of those stories, if used singly, can dehumanize us. And we can use any of those stories singly to dehumanize others. When we're scared and hesitant to share power, we stereotype and we scapegoat. So we shift the focus to intersectionality. I'm not just female, I'm not just brown, I'm not just secular, I'm not just a parent, I'm not just a yoga teacher. I'm all of these things and a lot more. So when you meet someone or hear their story, remember you are seeing only a tiny sliver of their entire life experience.
Awesome, I appreciate that. Let me add to that and ask, if you had to pick one aspect of your identity as you see yourself most as, what would that be?
A progressive, open-minded person.
See, if I stuck you to just pick one, right? It's really hard not to hyphenate, but that's the point, right? Is that there's so many parts of our personality that it's hard to just single out one aspect. However, when others perceive us, they generally choose a single aspect or maybe a double hyphen or other things, because not everything is made clear to them. Which brings us to the next question of, how can we create more opportunities for people to tell their stories that empower and humanize? So we talked so much about, like, what you leaned on aside from intersectionality was also the humanity of each other. So how can we do a better job of that, both in the public discourse and elsewhere?
I have a few ideas. I think it's important to see yourself reflected in your community's culture and education and leadership. I grew up in Topeka, Kansas, where we were one of like 2 brown Muslim families in my community. I just had no reflection of myself. So I grew up self-loathing and loathing of my parents' immigrant culture. And this followed me into adulthood. Even up to a few years ago, I used to say, I'm brown on the outside, but white on the inside. I'm not white anywhere, I'm brown. and I'm American, and I'm a Scottsdalean. We must do more to ensure that the leadership in all facets of our society is actually representative of the community it serves. And I think we just have to wake up to our own biases. Every single one of us, no matter how woke we are, and no matter the color of our skin, has implicit bias. It's just human nature. So first, we come to terms with that. Next, we interrupt that bias every single time it shows up in our daily lives. And we kindly call others out on their biases. That is not comfortable work, so we gotta get uncomfortable. And that's the only way that change happens. And I think it's important to start with children. right? Adichie talks about the danger of beginning stories with secondly. When she said that, I was reminded of listening in on my 3rd grade daughter's American history lesson a couple weeks ago via distance learning. She's in the Cave Creek Unified School District. The lesson was about Christopher Columbus. It went straight to Columbus was a brave man who sailed to America and made many discoveries. They totally skipped over, first off, there were indigenous people living on this land long before Columbus arrived, and he contributed to the large-scale decimation of those people. Then we can move on to secondly. So we can do things like re-examine our public school curriculum and the single stories that are told over and over again there. If we give our kids the gift of learning multitudinal stories, they will become adults who value that empowerment and humanity for all people. And lastly, we can emphasize similarities over differences, but without erasing our differences, because as we know, diversity is valuable. And being careful to not blur that line between pity and empathy. We don't want to be saviors. What we want to do is connect, share power, and seek out and embrace those complex, layered stories.
Absolutely. And as an educator, I'm going to put on hold what you mentioned and lean into the fact that I generally like to say, you know, the more you know, the more you don't know. And that exposure is critical. And to your point about like earlier, like the earlier you can expose, you know, young people to difference, to othering, obviously, you know, with the caveat of, you know, age appropriate and those types of things, I think the better off we are, because if all we know is what we see on TV or see on social media or see, you know, in other areas without actually having a critical understanding of it, I think we begin to create those biases, whether they're implicit or explicit, and we begin to create that misinformation or wiring in our brains that lead us to negative things. Thank you so much for your comments. I appreciate that. Let's move on to another storyteller. Bob, as a storyteller, you might relate to the author's reference to the power of stories. You've written poetry, for example. Share an perspective using imagination and empathy as relates to relatives who are now gone. Most people today can actually capture stories to connect more to those around them, both in home and in the community, whether it's through Instagram and visual stories, whether it's through, you know, blogs and narratives. A lot of people are able to get their story out now to the general audience. So tell us a bit more about that and what can folks do to share their stories with others, even with, as we all have, busy schedules.
I don't know how I became a storyteller, a poet in the beginning, except Mrs. Scherzer, my English teacher back in high school, made us write a poem. And somehow that started me. And all through my time in the Marine Corps and after working with the city of Scottsdale, I just began telling stories, mostly made up in my own mind. I've written stories about everything, about Native Americans, about the days after the Civil War. And as I began to think about stories, I reflected on the fact that I never spoke with my grandparents about their story. I didn't ask about, how did you get through the Depression? What games did you play when you were kids? All of that stuff. So what I did, and maybe it sounds narcissistic in a way, I wrote my own autobiography, primarily for my grandkids. When they grow up and they're 50 or 60, I said, what did Grandpa Frost do? What games did he play? What did he do in the Marine Corps? All that stuff is part of my story, so they get to know all pieces of it. Not everything you can put in your autobiography because it gets hard to do. But it's very, very simple. Now with today's computers and spaces, you can publish your autobiography and you can buy it for less than $5, for $4. They'll print it for you and sell you as many copies as you want to have published. It's very easy. It's very easy to do. And I think everyone should, at some point in their life, tell their story so that it's shared. From that perspective, that's how I got to where I published 3 poetry books and my own autobiography. So that's about it from that question, I think.
And I appreciate that so much. Let me sort of follow up with that. and I'm just going to use my own example. So my mother passed away in December, and you all of a sudden realize all the stories that are gone now. And so I appreciate that suggestion about having people create their autobiographies. But what if some of those stories are not things that people care to pass down? What are some of those stories are painful or difficult, or, you know, a lot of times it, you know, well, that's grown folks' business. We don't need to tell our children our you know, all of those things and those kinds of things. How do we navigate through, you know, some of those cultural differences, you know, amongst different ethnicities and races about the things that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because they almost have to be talked about at the time they occur with those with whom they occur. I remember having I lived in, when I grew up in a neighborhood, it was mixed. We had Hispanics, we had Jewish people, we had Scottish people, we had senior citizens, we had about 14 kids that lived on the block. There were the big kids and the little kids. And as we grew up, my best friend was Hispanic. And my dad worked for the railroad. I could tell he was prejudiced from some of the words he used, but he never shared it with us until my Mexican friend asked my sister for a date. No way, no way.
And that begins a difficult road, right? So we love and honor and respect our parents and our elders, and we also want to move ahead and have them be a little bit more understanding. And so there's a strange juxtaposition of, you know, when sometimes the younger people become the teachers, you know, and how do we navigate that as we move forward? And I would argue not just in family situations, but also in, you know, public discourse as well. And I just appreciate your ability to storytell. I read some of your poems in preparation for this moderation. And what I would also say, and you say this humbly, you know, but every story people can relate to. And you might think that they come out of the, you know, Netherlands or somewhere, or, you know, just osmosis, but the relatability is what, you know, Nadia was talking about, is what we were talking about. You know, a lot of times it brings people together. It finds the common ground. So even if it's a story, and there have been times when I've been teaching or other aspects where, you know, it's, you know, Angela's Ashes, for example, where, you know, it's an Irish story or something like that. And some of my students are like, well, that has nothing to do with me. Like, being able to find the common ground, you know, in literature is, you know, somewhat easier. Now in politics and in other things, it gets to be a challenge, but at least in terms of literature, sometimes we can find the common ground, and we can have that, you know, poetry is meant to elicit, you know, a response, right? And generally it's a feeling, right? And that feeling is what we generally feel.
Right. One of the stories I published, I shared with all the alumni that went to my high school, and it had to do about the boy who sat in the back of the room that nobody knew. He wasn't the athlete. He wasn't a soc. He wasn't involved with everything that was going on. And at the end it says, it was about, this title of it was Julia. At the end it says, Julia, can you see me now? Can you see me now? And you should have seen the response I got from everybody they were that kid.
Right. Right. And a lot of times, to your point, the stories that go untold, right? So, you know, a lot of times you know, if you're not loud, if you're not, you know, loquacious, if you're not, hey, look at me, those stories don't get told because, you know, they're not speaking up. But you finding a voice for them to have that arena and that limelight and spotlight, I think is essentially what the art of a storyteller is all about. And, you know, something that we can definitely take away and hopefully manifest in other areas as well. Put it that way. Thanks so much. I appreciate that. Kyra, the author mentions going back to normal, and I'm going to put that in quotations, because right now, what is normal, right? Like, what does that mean? So referencing normal to many people may actually support complacency. Others may not want to go back to normal because that just wasn't good for them. Or as I was talking with Bob, like the stories might be too painful. So because of inequities or prejudice or, you know, past experiences of trauma, et cetera. We all know that change happens slowly and it can be hard to do, like an inconvenience, right? Do we really have to change today? Like, you know, sometimes our kids want to wear the same shirt over and over and over again, or eat the same, you know, mac and cheese every day. You know, change is difficult, right? So from your perspective as an activist and ally, why do you think making an effort to develop self and social awareness is worth the inconvenience when it comes to change?
Yeah, well, first I think we need to ask, why is it an inconvenience? And I'm really big into asking ourselves questions. Whenever you hit resistance with something, to ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? And try to get to the root of that issue. So, you know, generally speaking, human beings, we tend to not understand what we haven't experienced or seen firsthand. And, you know, we just don't have an emotional connection to things that we haven't actually experienced. And that's why I have a unique perspective, because, you know, I was with a man from Liberia for 9 years, and my children are biracial, and I've actually seen things and experienced things firsthand. So, but I understand that that's not the case for everybody, and that's okay. You know, I'm part of this pageant where there's women with platforms in surviving cancer and surviving substance abuse and recovering from that, and I have no idea about that. I don't have an emotional connection to that, but I listen to their stories and I try to understand. You know, people are, like you said, adverse to change. So, especially if, you know, society kind of works for you, right? So that's something that I think people struggle with, especially, you know, I would say people that look like me, right? White people in this country, generally speaking, yes, there is different socioeconomic status of all different types of people, but certain things are more comfortable for us than there are for other people. And there's a scarcity mindset that always happens. That's just the way we're wired. And thinking that if other populations come up, that it's going to take from us, right? So just being aware of that kind of mindset and how we're wired, you know, but just knowing that even if you haven't experienced or seen something, that doesn't mean it's not real, right? So I love studying sense making. I think it's really interesting because we, as human beings, our sense making is so flawed, you know, and it's highly anecdotal, and it's rooted in our experiences and what we consume. And what we consume is filtered through our experiences. And then, you know, we just kind of deduct what we want to based off of how we already think. And we don't even know we're doing it, right? We don't know we're filtering through the information and only grabbing onto the things that we already believe, but that's how we operate. So I would say, you know, I mean, what I do, I'll tell you what I do, and I would invite everybody to do. When you don't, let's say you're having a conversation with somebody and you don't necessarily agree with this person, or they're rubbing you the wrong way, I would say, listen, right? And that's so hard to do sometimes, and you just want to say your point. But, you know, today I was at a food drive. I was helping with the food drive, and a man came up to me and he said, "Oh, you're Miss Arizona, you know, what's your platform?" And I said, "Equity in education." And he started, without, you know, me asking, he started telling me all of his opinions about what he thought was right and wrong in education. But he thought he was he thought he was a very moderate, very open-minded person. But what he was saying to me said otherwise. And I'm not saying that you have to, you know, just be nice to somebody or just agree with somebody. No, I'm just saying that if somebody's rubbing the wrong way, listen and, you know, try to step inside their shoes for a minute and see what you know, what it's all about. And the other thing that I like to do, besides being completely confrontational and saying, no, I think you're wrong, right? Because we all have reasons for why we say certain things or why we believe certain things. And I think this also goes for when we talk about generations and we talk about the younger generation maybe believing something different than older generations. And it's caused a lot of rifts and tension in families. And I tell people, you know, just ask questions. You know, if somebody's saying something that you don't necessarily agree with, ask them a question about it. I asked this guy, because he said he didn't believe in morality being taught in schools. I said, well, can you give me an example of what you're trying to say? Because I'm just trying to understand, you know, and he couldn't really give me an example. I said, what was something that a teacher taught that you didn't agree with, you know? And generally, like, when you ask people enough questions to get to the root, they'll start to answer their own questions, and they might even start to change their tune a little bit. So it's just, you know, it's just about that. It's not making anybody right or wrong about anything. Another thing, just being self-aware. As Nadia stated, it is definitely the human experience to be judgmental. Our brain likes to, you know, draw conclusions and see patterns and labels. And just to start to be aware of that. If you start to talk to somebody you don't necessarily know, what narrative am I playing in my mind about this person? What am I assuming about this person? And you just start to listen to that little voice in your head. And I think that can be really helpful in just starting with that self-awareness, and then that can branch out into other things. Again, be careful what you consume, because everything is spun in a certain way on both sides, on all sides. You know, you know, sense making, if there's a poll or study you're basing an opinion off of, see where it came from, how it was conducted, who funded it. I always ask people to do that. And yeah, and why this is all important is really because, you know, I'll tell you like micro and macro. So micro, I think it's super important because I think that gaining more understanding for things that we don't understand, it creates not only like an more internal piece, it helps with personal relationships, right? Because there's most likely close friends and family members that don't think the same way as you, right? So better relationships. And then on a macro level, you know, I just believe that, you know, we live in a global world now with technology, communication, transportation. It's just skyrocketed even in the last 10 years with technology. And we cannot stop the way the world is going. The world is becoming more integrated, more diverse, and that's not going to change. So whether you want to isolate yourself and try to resist the change, or whether you want to be a part of the movement, it's just important to be culturally sensitive, I think, and, you know, educate yourself on things that you don't understand, because it's going to affect all of us, whether we like it or not. And honestly, it's been proven that when you lift up disenfranchised communities, everybody's lifted up. It doesn't take away from people. Everyone is lifted, and it benefits everyone. So.
No, yeah. I totally agree. And I had to pull this up because my mind is just racing sometimes. So James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And so in order to face things, you first have to acknowledge, right? You have to have some sort of awareness. You have to have some sort of, I would argue, empathy or those types of things. You know, so many times when we're talking about these things, people want to move or jump right into, you know, acceptance. Acceptance is for the few, right? Understanding, awareness, empathy, and maybe even, you know, exposure. Those are the things that I think all of us can get to. You know, not everybody can get to acceptance. I refuse, my son is a Cubs fan. I refuse to be a Cubs fan. You know what I mean? I refused for the longest time to buy an iPhone. My students finally convinced me. I was Android all the way, you know? So there's just certain things that are ingrained in us, to what Nadia's point and your point, that I think, you know, we have this trepidation, we have these things that we do, and it's really hard for us to get out of those things. And so what I want to do right now is to sort of open this up for all of you and just sort of respond to each other's comments that you guys said. Like, what are some of the things that how do you feel about what Bob said? How do you feel about what Kyra said, Nadia, et cetera? And then we'll get to a few audience comments in a moment after this.
Well, one of the things that struck me from what Nadia said was, you see me walking down the street, you say, there goes an old man. The first, they're going to identify me as an old guy. You see me on a horse with my cowboy hat on, oh, there goes, here's a guy's playing cowboy. Or if you read one of my books. So there's so much depth to people that to find out their whole story is really difficult. You have to go to people where they are and engage them in conversation to get to know them about their whole story.
How do we begin to do that? And that's not just for you, but for everyone. How do we begin to essentially break out of the bubbles or any of the stereotypical things that we call now bubbles, silos, et cetera, et cetera? How do we begin to say, I think I'm gonna go to this Indian restaurant tonight because I want to try this, or I think I'm gonna go to, a different taco place than I normally do, or I want to, or I want to go to this, recital at the, Scottsdale Center for the Performing Arts. How do we begin to break out of, our normalcy?
I have one suggestion. I mean, a lot of us are on social media, right? Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is. And that is just tends to be for a lot of us another extension of our bubbles and our silos and our echo chambers, which it's we kind of get that like ping when someone agrees with us that makes us feel good, but it's not really allowing us to grow, right? So what I've been trying to do lately is to get out of that social media echo chamber. I've been trying to immerse myself in communities that I would encounter in my own neighborhood. Maybe not even, definitely not up in far north Scottsdale. So, and that's super easy to do, right? Like you can just follow an influencer, let's say in the Black community. You can follow, an influencer in the LGBTQ plus community. So then that stuff is like constant. We're always on our phones and it really seeps in. So that's, I think, one little way to start learning more about other people and have their perspectives a little more front and center in your own.
Awesome. Kyra?
Yeah, I think I touched on some things that Nadia had said. So yeah,
You're good?
Okay. Yeah.
One more before I want to get to your stories and the what if I told you. What if? It's so hard sometimes for us to do the uncomfortable, right? To lean into the discomfort, if you will. And I'm, 50 years old. Why would I want to do that? Why would I want to go out and do something that I like what I do? Why would I want to change what I do? You want me to like cricket? I like baseball. I'm not trying to like cricket. So how do we begin to challenge ourselves and our own assumptions and sort of begin to have, and I don't want to have it be completely uncomfortable because then we're not going to be inclined to want to do it again. But there's so many, and I would argue this is a good place, to talk about the city of Scottsdale. There's so many, wonderful fairs, and when things get back to being around people, there's so many things, the fairs, and people that come to give talks, and we're right across the river from one of the most top universities in the country, if not the world. How do we begin to, if you build it, they will come, is what they say, but that's not always the case. So how do we begin to encourage people to do the things that they don't necessarily think that they want to do?
Well, I'll tell you, I have a fun little story that goes against someone else that was speaking earlier. And since our club has been shut down, we said, well, let's go try pickleball. So I asked my friend, how about showing me on Monday night how to play pickleball? And he says, well, that's fine. Does your wife want to go? Well, I don't think so. I'll ask her. Hey, Judy, do you want to learn how to play pickleball? Yeah, okay. So we'll get a couple. We go down there. We got a first volley, 3 balls. Judy fell down and broke her wrist. No more pickleball. Trying something new.
Going to the golf course today. On to the next thing, right? And that's a perfect example of sometimes it doesn't work out the way we intend it to, but at least we know, it's like we know. I want to go to the slides about your stories and the what ifs, and I want you guys to explain those to us.
Me first. So this picture has nothing to do with my fun fact about me, but so I grew up in the performing arts, and I'm a big Broadway musical fan, and so I'm really into the arts. My boys aren't, but I've listened, when I have a musical that I really love, I'll listen to it over and over, watch it over and over until I know the whole soundtrack. And so I've actually turned these two little guys into major Hamilton fans. So now we're in the car and they asked me to play Hamilton on the soundtrack. And these were not musical guys before, so that's my fun fact.
That is a tremendous amount of growth on their part, right? I know everyone on the panel and in the audience can do this, but go ahead.
I know. So easy peasy. So I mentioned I was a yoga teacher, but one of my party tricks is, in addition to getting upside down, while I'm upside down, usually not in handstand like pictured here, but in headstand, I will recite the 45 American presidents in chronological order, and then follow it up with reciting all 50 states in alphabetical order. If we were in person right now, I would totally do it.
If we were to be on a stage. Speaking of stages, Bob, what do you have here?
Well, about 35 years ago, whole Phoenix area hosted the National Recreation and Park Association National Congress. And I was asked to ride into the Phoenix Convention Hall dressed as the Rhinestone Cowboy and lead everybody from the convention hall, which was finishing up, out across the street to the dinner function. And just as the horse and I got through the back door, I had to duck down to get out the door, a band started playing, and that horse tap danced for about two minutes before I could settle him down. We could continue. But there you go, Rhinestone Cowboy with battery packs and lights all over.
Awesome. I have the song in my head, and I just keep going, right? All right. What I'd like to do before we get to the audience is to give the panel one more time. If there are any thoughts that you'd like to ask the other panelists or anything else that you'd like to share. I mean, I appreciate so much all of your stories, and we are definitely not in an area where we've heard the single story. We've heard multiple stories that are wonderful, and as an audience member, I can hear a lot of similarities and things that are tying them together, and I'm so appreciative of that. So any other comments from the panelists? All right, let's move to the audience. So if you wish to put it in the Q&A, I have the box open and I can read it. If you prefer to raise your hand and just speak, that would be awesome as well. Either way, whatever works for you, however you're comfortable. And we'll try to get to as many as we can.
Stuart, I see a hand up from Pete Palmer.
Awesome. Pete, how are you tonight? What's your question? Unmute yourself.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, I just want to build on what we're talking about. And we talked about doing stories and giving stories. So just something that we are doing in the whole valley. And this goes to, as we've talked about, and maybe Bob will have a feeling for this, but a lot of our veterans don't ever talk about what they did. And in some cases, people don't understand what they did. They can't relate to what was going on. So as one of the speakers says, you don't have the interaction that occurs. But what we do have in this story is one group nonprofit, the Veterans Heritage Project. What it does is it goes around to veterans in the Valley, but it's high school students do this. So it's a project by the high school students to go around and they get the stories of the veterans in the Valley and then they publish the stories. It's really more of a civics program, because what the students get out of this is, first of all, you got a veteran that stands back and tells his or her story. But at the same vein is the students are now hearing about another time, another environment, another country, another view, and they get involved with the story. And then of course they have to write it up, and then they publish it into a nice volume, and then it goes into the Library of Congress. So we've actually got a procedure and protocol to tell stories. And in this case with a veterans organization, I think we can go beyond that too, because there's lots of good stories to talk about in Scottsdale, I think. So having a deliberate program to tell stories, and then what do you do with those and how do you put those out? So I just bring that up because I think in some ways we're doing that piece, and there is importance to that approach.
And I would love for that to be broadcast, put in the Independent, you know, highlighted in school board meetings, because I am a big proponent of intergenerational knowledge, and that so much of knowledge takes place outside of the textbook. So there are so many stories that I'm sure are told that are not even in the textbook, right? And so it's so much, it can make things, there's a project called History Alive. And one of those things is, you know, history being told through the eyes of, you know, people that experienced it. And I spend a lot of time that when I used to teach high school, and I definitely think it's something that, you know, and, you know, unfortunately, as we're losing, you know, Holocaust survivors and World War II veterans and even Korean War veterans and others, I think it's important to get those things down and in a visual way. We have so much technology these days that we can actually record them, you know, not just for current high schoolers, but, you know, my fourth grader and Nadia's kids and Kyra's kids, you know, that are going to be high schoolers at someday soon, when, you know, some of those people might not be around. So I think that's a really important, and there's Exhibit A right there. I think there's reasons that these stories should be passed down. Tremendous. I love that. Other questions?
But I'm gonna give you a downside here too, because what we also run into is some biases that against the military, where we have school districts that don't want their kids having that kind of discussion. So they don't allow that kind of participation. So we got to understand there's more than, as was highlighted, there's more than just racial biases that go around.
Absolutely. And I think thank you so much for mentioning that, because there's so many things that a lot of people have trepidations about. Well, we're not sure if that's age appropriate, or if we're not, but yet it's in your textbook. You know, we talk about wars, death, famine, all those types of things in textbooks all the time. So let's go to, do the panelists have any comments?
Peter, yeah, I'd like to follow up with what Peter was saying just a moment ago, if I might. And that one of the problems we have with the Vietnam vets is because of the politics that were going on at the time, they weren't welcomed home, and their stories weren't told, and they're hesitant to talk about them because they weren't appreciated as heroes. And so I, as a chaplain at the Marine Corps League, we run into that. And as we get to know each other, have to get to know them pretty well before they'll start talking about their experiences. I was in the Marine Corps before Vietnam, so I didn't have that bias, but I also don't have any war stories, but I can talk to people and seem to get them to talk. But they're going to have a difficulty talking about their experiences because of the politics at the time.
Right. That is a really brilliant point that I think is lost on a lot of younger people who, you know, don't know. A lot of times we don't even get to Vietnam when we talk about, you know, civics and history in high schools. Other questions, thoughts?
Yeah, I was just gonna say a quick comment about the age appropriateness of curriculum, or, you know, stories are introduced young. It doesn't mean that we have to say all the details, all the gory details about everything. But it's important that we introduce stories, that there is more representation of all populations, right? It's so important for young kids to see themselves and I think everyone here probably knows this, it's not a foreign concept, but It is important, you know, that's why Black Panther was such a huge deal, because there hadn't been, you know, a Black superhero, and that stuff like that, it seems like it's not important, but it really is. So in schools, for sure, and I think that's probably going to happen over time, so I'm happy about that.
Awesome, thank you. Kelly, other questions or questions from hands raised?
Stuart, there are no hands raised, but there both Jeannie and Hannah posted some comments in the Q&A, and I just wonder if either of them would like to express those verbally or anything else.
Thank you.
Sure, Kelly, this is Jeannie. I would love to. Basically, my topic is about differences and similarities to some of the students and families that I work with in my volunteer life, as it relates to the difference in stories, the difference in lives, and to celebrate those and to learn about those and to ask questions. And, you know, if it is something that you're not familiar with, then ask more questions and, you know, be very appropriate with what you're asking, and learn from that. Don't ever be afraid to ask questions about interacting with people that you don't know or that you haven't ever experienced. I work with kids with physical disabilities, so you just don't know what those families have been through, and you don't understand what they're dealing with. So just ask questions and understand, and you will be respected more than if you don't, or that you try to interact with someone and it's not appropriate. So
I absolutely love that. Panelists, do you guys have anything to comment on?
I love questions. You know, as a journalist, I love questions, but I think it's kind of chicken and egg. I think I became a journalist because I love questions and like hearing people's stories and having them tell me their stories instead of me kind of creating in my head. So I think Kyra said, often you can just ask a question and then a follow-up question to that and a follow, you know, and you get a domino effect where you finally get to that, to the root of it, and people will kind of, the light bulb will go on in their own heads. So often we find ourselves talking at each other or over each other or trying to make statements to convince each other of our beliefs, when a series of questions would do maybe even better, and then also allow us to learn, like, is it Jean or Jeannie said, to learn about other people.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I think the other part, and I just sort of want to push back on that. So how do I like to say that you don't know what you don't know. And so a lot of times people are reticent to say anything for fear of saying something wrong. Like in your experience, and panelists, Jeannie, if you want to answer that, how do we go about having it be okay to make a mistake?
Well, you have to embrace it, first of all, and you have to be willing to try. And if you do make a mistake, you know, on something, then, you know, hopefully that you will learn from that. And one story that I could share is that if you have somebody that is in a wheelchair or something, they don't want you to help them. You have to ask if they need help. So don't always assume or push your agenda or push your needs onto them, because you don't know what they're dealing with. And you just have to say, you know, I'm right here. If you need help, all you have to do is ask. So.
A wonderful visual example. Thank you so much. Hannah, do you want to give us your question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to share the fact that I think the family, it all starts with the family and how the family molds the children. So I think the parents really play a crucial role in providing the person a true reflection of yourself and not just leaving it to the school system or the educators, right? I recently did a speech about this, and research has showed that by the time kids enter school, like 5 or 6 or 7 years old, they already manifest some of the prejudices that they feel that the adults in their family have. And so how we really project ourselves to our children sets the tone for what their perceptions are going to be moving forward. Like, for example, if we're talking about being self-aware, am I self-aware that if I see a group of colored people walking towards me, I'll move to the other side of the street, right? So that kind of signals to my kid some sort of, that these people are scary, and I'm gonna think of them. The story that I'm gonna perceive about them is that they're scary because mom, right, moved on the other side of the street and didn't want to meet with them. So, and it also serves as the basis for how kids develop their own stories and how they project these stories to others to elicit the respect, the respect and the dignity that they want others to provide them or to give them. And so I think it's very important that it starts from the home, and it starts from us really having that conversation with our children on what's really going on, why it's going on, and being self-aware of our own prejudices and our own actions that contribute to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Panelists, thoughts?
Well, I think those prejudices occur, and they're set by the adults. Like when my father said that my sister couldn't date my best friend who was Hispanic, it sets a tone. Yet I grew up with a mixed neighborhood, so it didn't mean anything to me, except it told me, gee, my dad really is prejudiced. And fortunately, I've been able to it taught me some lessons about how I behave around people. So I think in that way, it's a good thing. I learned from the opposite of what I should know and have experienced in my life. Go through the Marine Corps and then working on the first diversity committee with Don Logan in the city of Scottsdale. We had the first diversity committee and back many years ago. So we learned a lot, but we've got a long way to go.
Appreciate that. Other panelists?
This isn't a panelist, but this is Brad Hartig, longtime employee of the city of Scottsdale, a lot of passion towards the organization. And I know we're talking about it from a more global perspective, and societally we have an issue, but I'd like to try to take this more towards Scottsdale and Scottsdale and our citizens and our views, and what do we think as an organization we can do to move that needle. There's definitely some work I think we could do there, and I'd love to hear from everyone of ideas that we could do to truly change that perspective a little bit, to open up everybody's mind, to have them see a different view. And I know it's a little inappropriate for me as a staff member chiming in here, but I've worked for the city for a long time and I got an extreme passion.
No, absolutely not. I appreciate that. And if we can put the slide up where we talk about the Scottsdale question, that would be great, because I think that is a perfect transition, and thank you for that impetus. What about Scottsdale? What are some of there's a lot of ways that we can, address this. We all live here for a reason, right? There are reasons that brought us here. And those are varied, and those are stories in and of themselves. But we've stayed here so far, right? And so what are some of the things that, and all of us are civic minded, and I appreciate all the work that everyone does, from elected officials to boards and commissioners to definitely the city managers and the city offices, whom I can't thank enough. What is our single story, or do we have one as a city?
If I might, just to get things started there, what is a single story? Well, as you probably concluded, I've been here for 49 years. And back in the 70s, we had a single story that was handed down by our leadership, and it was innovation. The city of Scottsdale was to be known as an innovative city. Our public works director invented the mechanized trash pickup. Used to be guys go down and throw the bags into the big dumpsters. Now it's all mechanized all over the country, invented right here in Scottsdale. The Greenbelt isn't a concrete canal. We have a greenbelt with parks and recreation. We did the sign ordinances. We got rid of, there's no billboards allowed in the city of Scottsdale. This happened back in the 70s, a sign ordinance. You couldn't have the Jack in the Box, Jack box come out. Golden Arches couldn't have the Golden Arches. Many things. We were the first to put bike lanes on city streets, the first to free-form swimming pools.
You go, Bob.
The first to have, early days, we brought baseball. So it's all happened in those days, back when we first started. So that was a single story then. The question is, what is our story now?
Stuart,
that's awesome.
Stuart, it's Kelly. We have hands raised from Tom Durham and then from Janice Shimikubo.
Awesome. Tom, how are you? What's your question, please, or comment?
Good. Well, our what we always say, our single story is the most western town. That's what we always repeat. But it doesn't include a huge amount of stuff. And in fact, sometimes it's kind of hard to see what that still covers, but it's something that we still preach, and a lot of people continue to believe in that, but it obviously doesn't include multitudes of stuff that goes on here.
I have yet to ride a horse since I've moved here. So. Although I'm one of the city people that I'm not afraid of horses. I just haven't done it yet. Janice Shimikubo.
Yes, so I think Scottsdale's single story is affluent, white, snotty, and it so that clearly rolls out so many other things, and that's certainly not necessarily true. We have a lot of diversity in Scottsdale, but it feels like people don't want to talk about it, or it's either ignored or denied.
Thank you so much for that, for leading us into what we were talking about earlier, some of those difficult questions. As we matured throughout the years, and we just got a brief history of the Scottsdale in the 70s, what does Scottsdale in 2025 look like? What is that story? Do we foresee that story looking like in 5 years from now, or even right now as we're talking? I mean, like I said, there is no normal right now, so everything is on the table.
Stuart, we do have a hand raised from Pete Palmer.
Awesome. Pete, what do you have to say? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm just going with, I'm going to throw in my planner bias here, but part of it is let's say having a good assessment of what we're talking about, what is Scottsdale, okay? And in the terms of, are we talking about the people that live here, or are we talking about the people we're trying to encourage to come here, or either temporarily or permanently, as we shape who we are and what our stories are? Because let's just say our business case marketing story might be different than the people who live here story. And how is Scottsdale changing now, and where is it going to the future? And part of that goes for us to doing the nug work analysis of who actually lives in Scottsdale. And I'll give it only because we had to do it for the veteran side. But when you look at the veterans numbers for Scottsdale, and by the way, I would break this out to all groups that live in Scottsdale, not just the veterans. It just happens that we were doing that process. When you look at the veterans here, over 60% are over 60 years old, probably retired, and about 85% white. There's a higher percentage of Black veterans than the Scottsdale populations of Blacks in terms of a percentage of a group. So part of the process I think we need to do is we try to say, what is the Scottsdale story? Is first of all, we need to look at ourselves and what do we have right now? And what does that mean to us? Are we a Western story, or are we turning into more of an urban metro piece as we look at developments? And I'm not arguing for one or the other. It's just, we got to have a vision of where we're going. And I know the city planners are working that way, but taking a hard look at what makes up Scottsdale. And of course, we can't divorce ourselves from the fact we're next to Phoenix, Mesa, and every place else. So we're all integrated. It's really a valley approach to that. So I would go, we need a planning drill before we start saying, so we can better understand who we are before we start saying what we are or where we want to be.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And you're only highlighting the complexity of this question, right? There is no single story, because what identity are we looking at it through? Are we looking at it through the lens, as you mentioned, of the business community? Are we looking at it through the lens of the Phoenician and the Princess hotels? Are we looking at it through the lens of someone who wants to come to visit versus someone who wants to come to live full time, or as a young person, in school districts, or as a retiree, as someone who wants to be a homeowner, or someone who wants to live in an apartment or a condo or a townhouse? So there are a multitude of ways that we can approach this. For those of us, and all of us, that are in volunteer capacity or even elected, as I mentioned, how do we get our story out to Janice's point, to sort of demystify or begin to reimagine the narrative of Scottsdale as being an inclusive city, as being a city that is accepting of all, as being a city that is a golden rule city? How do we begin to articulate that to all those stakeholders that you just mentioned and beyond?
Stuart, I'll jump in and say I think it's really important that we hear a commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging from our leadership. So whether that's city council, whether that's the mayor's office, whether it's the school district, I think there's been some reluctance traditionally in Scottsdale to even talk about the importance of these things. And I hope that is changing. And I think tonight is a step in the right direction. But I think as citizens, as taxpayers, as voters in Scottsdale, we have a duty to demand that of our leadership. That is clearly conveyed as a priority and as something we value. And I think that will go a long way to changing that kind of single story, the Scottsdale story. Kelly, I'm sorry, I know you hate that word, that is told about Scottsdale.
And Kyra mentioned it earlier about the idea that, not only are things difficult, but, we also need to make sure that we're telling stories that are reflective and accurate, but also, I would argue, forward thinking as well, right? While at the same time, and I want to be clear about this, while at the same time honoring the past. It doesn't have to be an either or, and so many people think that if we're moving forward that we're forgetting the past, and that's not necessarily always the case. There are ways in which to honor the past as we move forward. And, again, Kyra mentioned that, diversity in all of its components benefits everyone. And so how do we begin to tell that story, as a Scottsdale story? And this is just for the panelists and for the audience. How do we begin to tell that story that diversity is a benefit as opposed to a deficit?
I have an idea, and Nadia kind of made me think about it, and that is we spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars trying to attract tourism here because it's a big part of our industry. We don't spend any money, except for a little support for the Human Relations Committee, on creating this inclusiveness. And perhaps either through some of that money that's going in that direction, or additional funding that might be necessary to help get this message of inclusiveness, about understanding our story, our total story, and about getting and moving Scottsdale forward in this unusual climate.
Love it.
I think that the more we can facilitate an inclusive climate, the more, you know, marginalized groups will come out and feel safe to tell their stories. I think that's huge because a lot of times, you know, I myself, even just being a single mom, and, you know, it all has to do with support too, and how you feel in like the general environment you're in. And if you don't feel like you even have a voice, or if you say something, people might look at you weird, or they might, you know, think less of you, or they might not understand, then it's really hard for a lot of people to stand up and tell their story. Or, you know, whereas traditionally it's pretty easy for a white mom to get up and say, I don't agree with this, right? But not everybody feels like they can do that and actually have people behind them and support them. So, you know, just, you know, through the schools and having outreach to parents and encouraging more parental involvement and, you know, encouraging them to just talk about what's happened, you know, on that level. And I think just starting from one place and having it expanding into like the greater society, the more that, you know, people can keep understanding other stories, and I think overall the climate will change. Sorry for the background noise, but over time I think it will change if we all do the personal work to do that and encourage our you know, communities to do the same.
I appreciate that. Kelly, is there a question I see?
Oh, sorry. We do have a hand raised from James Eaneman, and we have about 5 minutes left.
Well, I'll get to the point. To me, the dialogue tonight has been informative and enlightening and thought-provoking. I'm trying to encapsulate everything that everyone has said. We have a rich past history, and the present is a constant assertion of the past, and as has been said, we cannot lose sight of that, and we need to build on that. But at the same time, a case might be made that the kind of things that Bob talked about are hardware. Those are marvelous things. So was the fire sprinkler initiative. We're the first city in the country to have that. But it seems to me that unintentionally, we've neglected the soft side, the people side, because after all, Scottsdale is the sum of all its parts. And some of those parts are not being heard. Some of those parts are hurt. Some of those parts feel they're not included. And I look on tonight, borrowing again from my friend Nadia, as an important first step in the diagnostic that we need to do. We're doing an examination of the city, and Pete talked about that, where we look at more numbers and all. And if we can begin to balance through leadership and initiative, the hard focus on the hardware, the structure to get the industry here, but also to embrace this somewhat terrifying and at the same time exciting future. This is a time to make better. And who among us does not want betterment, not only for our families, our neighbors, and our friends, but for everyone in the city? So I think if we can continue the diagnosis and then come up with a strategy of a balanced approach, recognize that some steps will be painful, but ultimately progress can ensue. So thank you.
And thank you so much for that, Jim. I appreciate that so much. Other hands, Kelly, real quick?
Yes, you have Linda Milhaven and then Pete Palmer.
Absolutely. And because we started a couple minutes late, I hope if you indulge us, I really want to hear what everyone has to say. So if you need to sign off, I appreciate that. And thank you so much for your time. But otherwise, I just want to hear these final two comments, and then we'll do closing remark or closing housekeeping rules. Congresswoman, sorry, Councilwoman.
Linda, you can call me Linda. Thank you.
Okay, Linda.
First, thank you so much for doing this. I think this is a great first step or next step in making Scottsdale the more welcoming, accepting place it could be. You know, for me, I heard Darren Walker interview recently. He's the head of the Ford Foundation, and in his interview, he said, white Americans want to believe that racism doesn't exist, and that watching the videos of people of color being murdered on video makes it impossible for us to believe that any longer. And when I heard that, I realized he was talking about me, and caught me up short and said, either I've not been listening or I didn't create a safe place for people to tell their stories. And so this, when I saw you were doing this, this resonated with me because I've made a commitment to listen better and to try to learn. And so I think this is a great first step. I think creating a safe place for people to tell their stories, and I completely appreciate your comment about it takes a lot of courage to step out. But if we can find vehicles, whether it's social media or videos, for folks to tell their stories, for folks to listen, and have folks listen. I think there's a lot of allies out there who I hope realize we have not been listening or not creating a safe place. And so if we can tell more of the stories, I think that that's helpful, whether it's social media or some kind of a campaign, I think that helps. And then I know Nadia made the point about it has to start with leadership. Yes, and you need to demand that of your leaders. I mean, I know the Human Relations Commission is talking about trying to look at an LGBTQ non-discrimination ordinance, and we can't get a council majority to think that that's a good idea to move that conversation forward. And so I think as citizens, you need to demand that of your leaders. But also know that your leaders listen to citizens. And so the more you can activate and engage people in this conversation, the more your leaders will listen also. So I am so grateful that you did this, and I wish more people would have joined, but let's hope this is just the next step in a broader conversation and finding ways for people to share their stories so that people realize Scottsdale is not Scottsdale, and it's not all white and all rich. But it is rich in diversity. So thank you. And please let me know how I can support your efforts.
I just want to say thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I appreciate you being here and representing yourself and your colleagues and the city in the way that you do. And the courage, as I mentioned earlier, the courage that it took to say what you said. And I appreciate that tremendously. So thank you so much for that. And last comments?
Yeah, I would volunteer right now to serve on Nadia's run for city council anytime she decides.
Who's gonna feed my kids spaghetti then?
Kelly, who was the last comment?
Pete put his hand down, so Pete may have. It's
well, I'll go ahead and jump in. I didn't want to keep everybody over, but I think it needs to be said. You know, we're all talking about the positive things we can do, but part of the analysis and going in, the part of the analysis is we got to recognize we have some significant biases that are in our community too. So when we're looking about the biases and prejudices, there's bad views out there as well as good views. So we have to understand if we're going to have a program and stuff to do what we should be doing, okay, as we've got to understand the obstacles we've got to overcome, because as Kyra has highlighted, a lot of people are neurally wired that way. And I don't care what we say or do, they're not probably going to change that perspective, but we can, as Linda was saying, we can do it with ordinances, we can do it with other things, because is the general rule that we follow is, rule of law follows culture by about 2 or 3 years. So laws change to match the changes in cultures. And I'll just say, as I brought up the human dimension piece, we were looking at who do we bring into the service, because they come from all walks of life. They are a reflection of society. So we have all the biases, we have all the prejudices, so we really wanted to look at how do we address that and understand we're taking that group of kids and we're going to send them off to someplace else that has completely different morals, completely different ethics, completely different everything else. And we throw them in conditions and how do we prepare them stuff. So I will tell you, the military, and in particular, that's why we did the human dimension concept, is we got to do better at that, given the diversity that we have to face. And, you know, it's not just the kinetic war, it's more about nation building. So I applaud this effort. There's a lot of challenges. I would argue we ought to understand, you know, the brain and how it works, because some of these people aren't fully developed. The frontal lobes aren't there yet. And we're running into the emotional, and beliefs will override facts every day. So we ought to, if we want to take a science approach to this, that we ought to be looking at the science to how we adjust this piece too. So, and belief systems can kill you right away in terms of trying to cause change. So I just throw that out. So I applaud this whole effort though.
Thank you so much, P. I appreciate that. And ironically that you end our discussion tonight talking about science, when one of the 3 videos that we chose from, one of them actually has to do with the neurological aspects of the health aspects of racism. And so potentially that could be something that, as we move forward with this, that could be the next TED Talk that we show. I have homework for you guys, everyone on the panel and everyone in the audience. I would love for you to go back to your respective communities, to your respective boards and commissions, and encourage this to happen. Right? Tell 5 people, tell 10 people that, hey, we had this, you know, town hall tonight, and when it becomes available and it goes live on any of the social media sites and the web page, that you show it to them and you encourage them and you say, yes, sometimes conversations are difficult and challenging, but yes, they need to occur. And yes, people are brave and talking about the things that they grew up with or the experiences that they've had. And it's not always negative, because out of that forged, you know, confrontation sometimes, and I don't believe there was any confrontation, you get a diamond and we move forward. And that's the only way that we can move forward, is by having these discussions in as wide of a scope as we can. And I just want to thank Sharon and Megan and Kelly and Brent and everybody at the, you know, at the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, everybody from the city. You know, this idea in a small person's brain, you know, to actually come to fruition is something that, it's why I want to make Scottsdale, you know, the best city possible. Why, you know, we believe in Scottsdale for all, and why, you know, we've had diversity dinners and those types of things, because of what can happen, you know, and I think it can and will happen with people like you. And so thank you guys so much for attending, and, you know, thank you so much for your brilliant comments. I would love to thank Bob and Nadia and Kyra for everything that they did and contributed. It was a tremendous effort. And again, I can't thank Sharon and Megan enough, you know, for the technical aspects, for the, you know, background aspects, and for Kelly for keeping us all on time and doing all those things and forging us ahead with everything as we move forward. So have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Be well, be safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon. Great job, you guys.
Thanks again. Appreciate it. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Kelly,
You all staying on?
You want us to leave?